Shana Tova. You can be seated now, everybody. we set the Torah down. Who by fire, who by water, who with a knee in the back of his neck, who while jogging in his neighborhood, who with a bullet through her bedroom window, after staying up late with her 8-year-old nephew, who while holding a mobile phone, who while sleeping in her home, and who, shall we say, is responsible. We say their names: George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Tatiana Jefferson, Stephon Clark, and Breonna Taylor. And there are many more, so many more. Black people are 3.5 times more likely than white people to be killed by police in our country when blacks are not attacking or do not have a weapon. Black teenagers are 21 times more likely than white teenagers to be killed by police. A black person is killed about every 40 hours by police. It's shocking. It's really beyond shocking. This brings to mind for me tomorrow's Haftorah, the Haftorah of the second day of Rosh Hashanah, from the prophet Jeremiah. Thus says Yud-He Vav-He, a voice is sounded in Ramah, a wailing, bitter weeping, Rachel weeping for her children. Rachel's voice is the Divine Mother, the Shekhinah, weeping for her children, weeping for these black lives lost. This brings to mind the sound of the shofar that we will sound shortly, the shvarim, the wailing, broken sound, giving voice to our grief as we hear of yet another, how can it possibly be, yet another Black American killed by police? And its expression of brokenness, the shvarim of the shofar, reminds us of the brokenness of our system of policing in our country. So we begin with acknowledging that pain, the pain felt by so many Black Americans, the pain that has filled the hearts of so many of us who have opened ourselves to these horrific events. And we say today, Hine Yom Hadin. Today is the day of judgment, of justice, the day we are called to account, the day our actions or our lack of action is noted, is somehow registered by the divine accounting. Just a short while ago, we davened in the Amidah, special words for Rosh Hashanah on page 365. It says, "The creator of the hosts of heaven shall be exalted through the rule of law, and God, the Holy One, made holy by the reign of justice." How is God holy, made holy through the reign of justice? It is through us. This idea is there even in straight traditional Judaism, not just through Reconstructionist humanistic theology. We are the way divine justice becomes real in our world through the institutions and the societal structures we set up and maintain, that we take responsibility for, or for which we abdicate responsibility, that we reform and transform and envision anew, or that we leave as they are. Rabbi Arthur Green writes of this idea of God becoming real through our actions right here in our machzor. He's quoting from his wonderful book of Jewish theology called Seek My Face, and evoking the foundational principle of humanity being created b'tselem Elohim, in the image of God. So I'm drawing from page 386 if you'd like to follow along in your machzor. He writes, "We take it as our task to enhance each person's potential for realizing the divine image, remembering that each of us bears a portrait unique and vital to the wholeness of God. But how can that portrait be? But how clear can that portrait be when its bearer is suffering from hunger or from political oppression, or we could add from police brutality? If we are going to enhance the divine image in this world, we must work to maximize human freedom, always remembering that it was only after we came out of bondage that we were able to look towards God's mountain. That commitment to freedom," he continues, "also includes helping people to create the sorts of lives and social structures to allow that freedom a lasting and secure home. Religious humanism means a realization that the task is ours to do. We no longer wait for the divine hand separate from our own to come and save. This acceptance of responsibility is itself a sacred act for us. We seek to accept with deeply humbling gratitude the role of actor for divine compassion in the world of physical reality." And so, really transforming our country's tortured history of racism is up to us. Aleinu. It is upon us. It is part of the burden we bear, the responsibility we take on when we seek to enhance each person's potential for realizing the divine image. As with so much of systemic racism, there are few quick fixes for changing that vast system, or even, of course, few quick fixes for ending police brutality against Black Americans. Although to begin with, I think it's important to recognize that there is a history of trauma and oppression that stands behind any single incident of police brutality that takes over the news. As the psychologist and scholar of racism and policing, Philip Atiba Goff, explains, "For any policing reforms to be successful, departments must first contend with their violent histories and the pain they've caused. Many departments got their start hunting down Black people who had escaped enslavement. Decades later, police enforced the segregation of entire cities and beat Black people for attempting to exercise their civil rights." Just to give a concrete example of this history of trauma that's right here in Prince George's County, our county executive, Angela Brooks, also grew up in this county, and her family arrived in Prince George's County after her great-grandfather was murdered by a white sheriff's deputy in South Carolina. Her mother, who was 9 years old at the time, was so traumatized that she did not speak for a year. Also, Brooks reported this in a Washington Post interview. Imagine the intensity of this burden to bear this as the county exec also Brooks is overseeing policing in our county. So part of addressing police brutality is the issue of bad apples, but the bad apples are situated in a larger system. The officer who killed George Floyd, Derek Chauvin, had been involved in 18 police misconduct cases, 18. The officers who killed Tamir Rice in Cleveland in 2014 and Antoine Rose in East Pittsburgh in 2018, both Black teenagers, were dismissed from previous jobs as police officers. When an officer is dismissed, typically the Fraternal Order of Police has helped them resign quietly instead of being fired, giving these officers the ability to work for another department. It's an example of something that must change. Part of the issue is realizing that police are not well equipped to handle folks with mental illness, to de-escalate situations. There's just only limited training that they can be given on that. And the demands that are being shouted in our streets all over our country for weeks and weeks are not just for reform. The demand to defund the police is not an easy slogan for many of us to get behind. Black Lives Matter and other protesters are calling for a divestment from policing and an investment in programs and social services in Black and other marginalized communities that could reduce the need for police. As Jews, especially those of us who are white or who are viewed as white, we primarily associate police with protection. In response to a rise in white supremacist violence in recent years, this is a rise which the Trump administration has shockingly and consciously sought to downplay as a threat and to turn away from it. Just as a little aside, but as a response to that, we at OSE have police officers in front of the building when we have larger groups here. And it makes many of us, most of us, feel safer. Black Americans have a very different experience of police. 2/3 of Black Americans don't trust the police to treat them equally. For those of us who are white, our experience with the police is one very powerful way that we benefit from white privilege, regardless of our intentions or what we kind of think in our own minds. For example, my children have grown up and we've raised them to see police as helpful. They don't think twice about bounding up to the police officer in front of Oseh Shalom and asking him different questions and about whatever. Unlike virtually all Black American parents, I don't have to worry about having the talk with my boys, the talk about how to behave with police. I don't have to experience the existential worry about what could happen when my older son is walking home from a local park and encounters a police officer. And at the march and rally that I attended at Black Lives Matter Plaza in DC a couple months ago on Juneteenth, one of the frequent protester chants, which has been a popular chant evidently at other protests around the country, was, "Who keeps us safe? We keep us safe." And that was chanted, many times. I felt like for me, I'm sorry, that's not my reality. At the end of the day, I want police to keep Oseh Shalom and my home as well safe. I don't think, I couldn't get behind that chant. I don't think we keep us safe. And so how can we address these issues that I'm just laying out the tiniest sketch of? But how can we address these without demonizing police, as is often happening in a lot of the intense discourse that is sweeping, our country in these intense, polarized times? How can we have compassion and empathy for the extraordinary difficulty of the situations police find themselves in, for the split-second life and death decisions they have to make? Over and over again, police officers put their own lives on the line to protect us. So how can we address these issues that I'm laying out and still honor the immense sacrifice that police officers make for us? So it's complicated. It's not an easy thing, but we need to engage, particularly for those of us who are white. We need to listen. We need to lean in. We might need to let ourselves get uncomfortable. We need to act. I've spent my adult life as a Jew hearing stories of how Jews engaged in the civil rights movement, hearing those hallowed stories. I have seen us hold up the photo of Rabbi Abraham Joshua Heschel marching with Dr. King at Selma way more times than I could ever count. So we are living through the greatest time of racial reckoning in our country since those days. How will we engage with it? We have one small opportunity to engage coming to Oseh soon, just after the Chagim. On Friday, October 16th, a local Black pastor, Victor Kirk, will address the topic of systemic racism and offer his thoughts about what the Prince George's Leadership Action Network, also known as PLAN, which is a local community organizing effort that Oseh could become more involved with. He'll talk about about systemic racism and what PLAN can do to address it. That's going to be on Friday night. And if you're interested in exploring Oseh's deeper involvement with racial justice work, please contact the co-chairs of our somewhat recently reformed and dynamic social justice committee. You could reach out to Linda Bergovsky or Ioana Stoica, both in the directory. In closing, it seems to me that to say Black Lives Matter is another way to say Zochrenu L'chaim. Remember us, all of us, but especially those whose lives our country has far too often seen as less than for life. Shana Tova.
Ruah Tikia Tikia Teruah Tikia Gedolah Turn to page 606.